Welcome back everybody to the channel on our Budget Builds monthly series. Let's check out what we have for the month of November. At the beginning of the month, I went ahead and I updated our Budget Builds monthly request form. If you're watching us for the first time, thank you so much for joining us. Let's check out how we actually fill out these request forms. At the top, we have our budget. Prices are in USD. Budget builds do not include any tax, fees, or Windows keys, unless asked otherwise. Type of system we have is gaming, working combined. Form factor preferences. This will determine case sizes. You can have mini ITX all the way up to XL ATX, or if you have no preference. We have our CPU and a GPU preferences. You want an Intel CPU, AMD CPU, have no preference. NVIDIA GPU, AMD GPU, no GPU preference. And if you want me to include the Intel GPUs, just go ahead and write it in other. Areas of focus include our CPU, cooling, motherboard, memory, storage, GPU, case, and power supply. Pretty much anything you want me to focus on specifically. Now, this will be affected by your budget. If you have less of a budget to work with, we cannot focus on anything too great. For example, if you have a $500 budget and you want to focus on CPU and graphics card, it will be very difficult to get a balance of the two. You're going to have to really focus on one, but don't worry, you can just go ahead and select your areas of focus and we will try to work with it as best as we can. If you've already purchased or own any current system components you want to use in the next build, you can go ahead and you can write it in the text answer below. For example, if you have a 500GB M.2 SSD or an 850 watt gold power supply or a case, anything will help bring that price down. Any peripherals you need, like a mouse, keyboard, a monitor, any headset, and then any other requests you can write in here. And don't forget to fill out this next month's Google form, links down in the description below. Quick disclaimer, the budget builds will be as close or slightly over the budget due to part availabilities, any sales going on at the time of recording, as well as we are not including OS keys or peripherals unless asked otherwise. Unless we have budgetary constraints, 4 builds will be coming out of this, 2 AMD and 2 Intel, both on the previous and newest generation. This is to ensure flexibility and upgradability to future-proof it. At the end of the video, we will be comparing each system to each other and displaying the pros and cons of each build, so then we can figure out which is the best build for the current price. Alrighty, let's check out our response for this month's Google form. They have a budget of 1,000 US, wants a combination working and gaming system, wants a micro ATX tower, has no CPU preference but wants an NVIDIA graphics card, wants us to focus on CPU, cooling, storage, and graphics card. Currently has a 500GB M.2 SSD and a mouse, wants us to get them a keyboard, a monitor, and does not want any RGB. Now that we know what the user system's preferences are, let's get into the actual builds. For our builds, I went with a DDR4 and DDR5 template. These templates are pretty much going to stay the same between the two. The only real factors will be memory and possibly storage. For our DDR4 template, we went with the Corsair Vengeance LPX 16GB kit. For storage, we went with the Crucial P5 Plus, a 2TB PCIe 4.0x4 NVMe SSD. We went with the Johnsbow C6 Micro ATX Mini Tower case. For the power supply, we went with the RM750E. This is a fully modular ATX power supply, 80 plus gold. According to the Johnsbow website, this does fit in our case. Now, you could go for an SFX power supply. That will cost a little bit more if you're worried about dimensions, but according to the website, it does fit in the case. Also, not included in the case are case fans. I went ahead and added a 5-pack of 120mm Arctic P12 fans. For the monitor, we went with the Acer SV220Q, a 75Hz 1080p screen. And for our keyboard, we went with another placeholder of a SteelSeries Apex 100. Now, the reason for all these placeholders is just to get the item on our list and just a basic average of how much will be being spent on each item. Of course, you don't have to go for these Johnsbow C6 Micro ATX power. You don't even have to get this 75Hz monitor from Acer. Anything on this list is just more of a placeholder in that sense. Starting out with our AMD systems, we have the Ryzen 7 5700X, 8 cores, 16 threads, 3.4 GHz boosting to 4.6. Now this does not come with a CPU cooler, so we went ahead and added the Noctua NH-L9A. For our motherboard, we went with the ASRock B450M. That same memory, storage, case, power supply, case fans, monitor, and keyboard all pretty much stay the same from our template. Although this time we were able to add an RTX 3060. It's an 8GB Asus dual overclock graphics card. For our Intel build, went with the i5-10600KF, a 6-core, 12-thread, 4.1 GHz boosting to 4.8. Since this also does not come with a CPU cooler, we stuck with that same Noctua NH-L9 cooler. For the motherboard, we went with the Asus Prime H510M, that same Corsair Vengeance RAM, same storage, video card case, power supply, fans, monitor, and keyboard, all from our template and previous AMD system. Moving on to our DDR5 builds and our template, went with the G-Skill Ripjaws S5. It's a 32GB kit, DDR5 5600 CL28. It's not the fastest RAM, but its CAS latency does make up for it. So unless you're able to get a faster kit, maybe 6000, 6200, this is pretty stable, but AMD does like faster RAM. For our storage, we went with the MSI Spatium M450. Now, when this was available, it was on Newegg for $39.99. Hopefully soon PC Part Picker does put it back onto the website. Then we have the same case, power supply, case fans, monitor, and keyboard from our DDR4 template. Let's check out what we have for our actual PC builds. Starting off with our Ryzen 5 7600. It's a 6-core, 12-thread, 3.8 GHz boosting to 5.1. Went with the ASRock A620M. That same G-Skill Ripjaws S5. That MSI Spatium M450. Then for our graphics card, we went with the Asus RTX 3060 V2. It's the 12GB version. Now this is $299.99, and we are a little bit over budget. You could drop it down to their 8GB version, which is $249.99. That would bring us under budget. Only being relatively $30 US over budget, I would actually just wait and see what we have later on. So just don't worry about the graphics card being over budget. Let's just continue on and see what we got. And then we have the same case, power supply, case fans, monitor, and keyboard from before. Again, sitting a little bit over that budget with that rebate going on. Finally, we have our Intel build. Went with the i5-13400. It's a 10-core, 16-thread, 2.5 GHz boosting to 4.6. Went with the Gigabyte B760M. That same G-Skills Ripjaws S5. The MSI Spatium M450. Now, previously I said that this thing goes for $39.99. I did include a Team Group 1TB SSD only for the current pricing on, so we can see how much money we actually over budget. Now, this isn't on our previous AM5 system, but this does give us an idea of how much over budget we are actually in this build. Of course, there's no rebates, no promos going on with this Intel system, but since sales are like right around the corner, this thing is actually pretty good. Of course, when I did build these, everything was under budget, sitting right around $1,002 or $1,003 or under $998. We have the same graphics card from before, case, power supply, case fans, monitor, and keyboard. Again, we are $60 US over budget. If we drop this down to the 8GB version, it's going to bring us down pretty much to $10 over budget. But let's get into CPU benchmarking, GPU benchmarking, and then figure out if it's actually better off going used. Let's get into CPU testing. Now that we finished CPU testing, we've determined that our Ryzen 5 7600 is our best CPU. Now before I get into GPU testing, I do want to take a turn and look in the used route, because we will be able to save some money in certain places like the monitor, the case, and the graphics card. So hop on eBay real quick. So around 2 to 210, you can get an RTX 3060 or 3060 Ti, which means if we're willing to spend 250 to 300, we can actually get a better graphics card. So to find an RTX 3070 or 3070 Ti for right around 300, you're gonna have to do a little bit of digging to find those kinds of sales, but you'll be able to find them for right around 300. And lastly, we have an RTX 3080. It will be a little bit more difficult to find one for right around the $300 to $400 range. But this shows that we can go the used route and actually get some money to get a better graphics card, or using the same money, get a better graphics card. Before we take a look at other used components, let's get into graphics card testing. Now here we are testing the RTX 3060, 3060 Ti, 3070, and 3080. Now it was easier to find a 3070 in our budget, but if you're able to find a 3070 Ti or RTX 3080, I would go for those instead. Now this video is using the Ryzen 5 7600X and not the Ryzen 5 7600, but if we look at our CPU comparisons, it's only a 5% difference in CPU score. So the FPS we're going to see on screen, just take it with a 5% difference in margin. It won't be that big of a difference, but it will be enough. And quick reminder, the user wants an NVIDIA card, which is why we're not looking into AMD. I know the RX 6650 XT is a little bit better than the 3060, but it's the user's preference. So let's finish out our GPU comparison benchmark.
Look.
And now that we've determined that we're pretty much looking for an RTX 3070 at least, let's finish out our used components build so we can finalize our list. And for mini ITX cases, so we can find ones for, 50, 60 bucks, brand new or open box, or we can go used and get one for half that, sitting right around like 30. So even on cases, we can find some pretty good pricing if we go the used or even open box route. And then lastly, we have our 1080p monitor. Now we can get ones for 30 to 35 US. So instead of the 80 for the Acer SB220Q, we're gonna put 35 bucks in place of that. So let's put these numbers together and figure out our used build. Now for our used route, we sit at 996, have everything we need, storage, graphics card, we're able to get a 3070 for around 300. Just have to do some digging. Case, we're able to drop down to 35, but this is all preference. You can go spend however much you want on a case. Power supply still stays the same, unless you want it to go used. There was one more thing I wanted to take a look at for the used route, which was power supply. Not going with a used power supply, but going with a brand new in-box power supply can actually get you a cheaper power supply with still in its packaging for less. Now, my only thing about not buying it from an authorized reseller or directly from the manufacturer and buying it off of like eBay from a seller is the warranty. If the power supply breaks by any chance, you're able to go back to the store like Newegg, Best Buy, Micro Center, and they'll honor their warranty. Unless the seller on eBay has the warranty and will give it to you, that is the only issue I find with buying specifically in the power supply. And then keyboard we could find for like $5, but whether we decrease that or increase that does not matter. Since our CPU, the cheapest one you can get is $215. The next step up is $238. But the only thing is, if we step up to the Ryzen 5 7600X, this does not come with a CPU cooler. So if we were to spend the next 15 to 25 US, we would have to spend another 40 on the CPU cooler. So that leaves us with this. There's a lot of different paths you can take. You can put your money in different places. You can get an RTX 3070 for around 300. You can even go for a 3060 Ti and spend the extra 50 bucks on a 7600X with a CPU cooler. All in all, user, it's your preference and your choice how you want to do it, which leaves us with our clear-cut winner of our Ryzen 5 7600 brand new build. In our Ryzen 5 7600 used build, Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.